Okay, I'm just testing this. Hello everyone who may be following me. Going to start in a minute or two, but just making sure that this is all working. Just going to give it a few minutes for a few people to pop in, and then we'll get started on. Instagram, we've got wavers. We've got people waving at me. Hey, that must be working. Got number 5 on Facebook. We've got a few people there. This is very exciting. 6, lovely. Alrighty, give it a few minutes, and then we'll get talking about A Midsummer Night's Dream. It's exciting. I hope everyone is well. King's Head Theatre, say hi James. Hi King's Head Theatre. Marvellous. Okay. Bear with me everyone. Okay. I can hear the bell ringing 1 from Windrush Square in Brixton, which is where I talk to you from, so I will get going. Thank you very much for joining me, everyone, on Facebook over here and Instagram over here. For those that don't know me, my name is James Callàs. I'm a junior associate at the King's Head Theatre. I completed their trainee director course a couple of years ago, and am a freelance theatre director. I've been asked to jump in and to do a book club, which is essentially going into a little bit more depth on a play of my choosing. And the play that I have chosen is A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare, which I hope that the majority, if not everyone, who is joining me here digitally has encountered that play at some point. Now, it is a play that is very popular, and it's sort of, you'd expect to see it on a wonderful summer's day in a field somewhere in England. It's got fairies in it, it's got magic, it's got lovers, it's got comedy with the mechanicals, and I think it's very fond. Everyone's very fond of that play. I'm going to sort of reference 2 productions that I've seen over the last few years that were quite significant for me, and then also sort of talk about my own impressions of the play and things that interest me about it. I'm just going to try and whiz these down. I can't seem to, okay, never mind. Sorry about that. Okay, so just a quick recap on A Midsummer Night's Dream, in case anyone is sort of going, hang on, which one's that again? Essentially, you have 4 lovers. This is one of the plots, whereby you have Hermia, Helena, Lysander, and Demetrius. These are the lovers. Hermia wants to marry Lysander, but her father says, no, you must marry Demetrius, who Helena loves. Lysander and Hermia elope, and they run away to go into a forest in order to get married away from her father. And while they're in the wood, a lot of crazy things happens with fairies and magic and lots of little love potions, and they begin to fall in love with different people, and in the end they come out and they're suitably in 2 pairs. Demetrius is with Helena and Hermia is with Lysander. Meanwhile, we have the Mechanicals. The Mechanicals are a group of sort of workmen and women from the town, and they are preparing a mini play to present in a couple of days at the wedding of Theseus and Hippolyta, who are sort of the rulers of Athens, of the land. The Mechanicals are often known as being very funny because they are pretty bad actors. They make a lot of mistakes, and they're headed up by a sort of ego-driven actor called Nick Bottom. My first role in youth theatre, thank you very much, when I was 15. You also have the fairies. The king of the fairies is Oberon, the queen of the fairies is Titania, and they have a feud and they live within the forest. And another significant character is called Puck, who is does what Oberon tells him to do, and he goes around and puts little magic flowers in people's eyes, and he's the one that interferes and makes the lovers sort of fall in love. So that's sort of broad strokes what Midsummer Night's Dream is about. Now, the two productions that I want to reference are one that was at the Young Vic, Midsummer Night's Dream, directed by Joe Hill-Gibbons and designed by Johannes Schultz. Now, what was sort of stand out about that production was the design was a semicircle mud pit. The whole thing, the whole stage was completely covered in a sort of wet, squelchy mud, which kind of went against this notion of a very light and magical and fun and happy sort of play. And I'll go into talk a little bit about why that's interesting. And essentially, Joe, as when he was interviewed about that show, he often sort of referred to Midsummer Night's Dream as being quite dark, actually, and that it's a play whereby people are finding it difficult to connect and sustain relationships, and that darkness associated to the play, I think, offers up a lot of points to discuss. The other production, which a lot of people might have heard of, particularly those in London, was A Midsummer Night's Dream, directed by Nick Heitner, which was at the Bridge Theatre and designed by Bunny Christie. Now that was the audience were the play took place amongst the audience. There was acrobatics. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of fun. There was a lot of music. There was it sort of tapped into a lot of those tropes that you would expect to associate with the play. But there was one major change in that production, which I think was very interesting and we'll also talk about. Now, the first thing that I'm going to go into is essentially the first scene of the play, which I think is often sort of swept over, as in the significance of that first scene is sometimes not maybe given as much attention as it should be. Now, as I mentioned when I was sort of discussing the plot of the play, Hermia, one of the lovers, wants to marry Lysander. Now, her father, Aegeus, says in the first scene of the play, he says, "No, I do not want Hermia to marry Lysander. I want her to marry Demetrius. And under the law of Athens, if you do not do what I say, as my father's daughter, if you do not do what I say, then under the law of Athens, you must be killed, or spend the rest of your life in a nunnery." Essentially, be in prison for the rest of your life. Now, what the hell? That's terrifying. That's not like oh, you better do what I say, otherwise, I'll get you. No, I'm going to kill you if you do not do what I say. Now, I think that's not only gives gives us a good reason to understand why Hermia wants to get the hell out of Athens and run away with Lysander, but also that frames everything about the rest of the play for her and for those four lovers in quite a challenging way. But because I think what it also gives me thoughts to, clearly, therefore, it's a very patriarchal society. I, the man, I, the father, get to decide what happens to my daughter, and if she doesn't do what I say, then we'll kill her or we'll send her away. That's not okay. That's quite problematic. But also, that is something that's going on underneath the surface for Hermia as a character, is that drive to survive is quite powerful, and it's quite a dark sort of opening in a weird way. And I think what happened in the Young Vic production, because it was set with all of this mud and sort of darkness, and this, it kind of actually extracted some of the violence that was in that like threat quite nicely. And actually at the Bridge Theatre, and I spoke to one of my friends was in that production, and I spoke to her about it. She said, you know, at the beginning, the women in that opening scene, there was choral singing, and this is how Nick Heitner directed it. There was choral singing. The women weren't allowed to look at the men. They had to have their hair covered, because actually we're in that opening of the play is in this very sort of austere, slightly problematic, male dominant like place. And actually you also think about the mechanicals, so the people that these workmen that are trying to put on a play, they're constantly scared of of messing up. And they actually say through the comedy, you know, Nick Bottom keeps popping up and he keeps saying, oh, we must not scare the women, we must not be, you know, we must not, if we have a lion on stage, we must tell them that there's a lion because it might be too scary. Or you know, they're constantly trying to censor and like sort of tame and not mess up. Now, one argument is that they just want to be selected and they want to be picked to perform in front of the Duke, and it's all quite jovial and well, great. But the other side of it is that if they really mess it up, then what are the repercussions? Like what's going to happen if they perform really badly? And as it happens, they do perform badly, but it's seen sort of that's okay. So because they sort of laugh at how bad it is, in which case they sort of it's irrelevant. But if there's a threat of death for the mechanicals, then that also, you know, that adds a new dimension to the play that maybe is not always sort of acknowledged. But also this thing that I think is interesting about that threat. And if we do like really heighten this sense of a patriarchal society in Athens at that time, is what is love? What is by which standards is Aegeus sort of deciding that he prefers Demetrius over Lysander? And also we mustn't forget that Demetrius has said he was already engaged to Helena, and then he went, nah, actually I'll go with Hermia. So actually the idea, the notion of what is love is already been thrown up. Like, why does Aegeus like Demetrius? Is it because of his status in society? Is it because of his job prospects? Is it because of his money? Or is it something, or is it actually because you know he thinks that Demetrius loves Hermia more than Hermia loves Lysander, or what have you? So it casts a doubt over what is love. And let me just refer to my notes, sorry. Love. Yeah, so therefore, if we have a question mark over the legitimacy of love, or we're unsure about what the love is, then it throws up some interesting questions when these lovers go into the forest. Because these four lovers who, two men fancy one woman fancies one of the other men, they go into the wood, and then when they come out again, it's all resolved, and they all love each other in different ways. Now that's pretty weird. That's pretty mad. And so that leads me on to ask the question about what is the drug that is used by the fairies to manipulate these lovers into loving different people. Now, so as if you know the play, Puck has this little purple flower. It's this lovely moment where he drops it into one of the lover's eyes, and then the lover, or whomever it is, it might be Titania, Lysander, or Demetrius, like they wake up and the first thing they see, they fall in love with. Now, that's lovely, and that's very, you know, how charming, and that's very funny. People find that very funny in the play, where someone wakes up and like go, oh my God, I love Nick Bottom, who is an ass, or I love you now. But actually, if we try and root what's going on a little bit, we take it away from it being magic. We take it away from being like this little fairy that's bouncing around and putting a flower in someone's eye, and we try and bring it back into like the real world, and we root it in reality. Then actually, what's happening for these people is they're experiencing a deep hallucinogenic state, which is disturbing, and they start acting in a behaviour which is not their own, and which is not, that they're not dictating. But also they're led to almost to violence, like Demetrius and Lysander. Like you could argue they want to kill each other, such as their dispute over loving Helena once they're under this spell. And actually, that was what was very good, I thought, in the Young Vic production, is these lovers were wrestling and grabbing each other in the mud, trying to get to each other, trying to win over the women and beat each other. But also there was something quite disturbing and quite violent about these lovers, sort of under the spell of something. Somebody like, I want her, I'm going to kill you to get it. Like, what? What's going on, guys? What's happening? What is this drug? And I think that's quite interesting, because it's significant how much their behaviour changes. Now you can do that in different ways. You can either, if you were to do a production, let's say, and you were to take what I'm saying as the way in which to do it, which is to really like root the drug in like reality, then that can either be like a huge sort of tonal shift in the play, whereby you're quite literally going into some sort of hallucinogenic state, and you can like shift that with colour and shift that with movement, and like the whole tone of the piece can change, or you could shift it in a very different way and make it quite dark. Anyway, I mean, well, Nick Bottom comes out of this whole thing and he says, I have had a most rare vision. Whether that's magic or whether that's hallucinogenic drugs, I don't know, but I think it's an interesting question to pose, and maybe one that isn't always interrogated. Right. But what undermines my theory, or this theory that I'm sort of saying about this hallucinogenic drug, what undermines it is the sense that Demetrius, he never comes off that drug. Like, he is given the drug, he falls in love with Helena, and then that's never removed. That's never like, there's no U-turn, where there is a U-turn for Titania and there's a U-turn for Lysander, which does make us maybe question whether or not whether it is magic, like it does go on forever. Unless, and this is I think quite an interesting point, unless that drug does wear off and Demetrius does come round and he does sort of go, well, what the hell's just happened? But on his own decision making, through his own like reflection of his behaviour and on the areas of his ways, he then decides, what have I been doing? And he on his own and he decides that actually I would like to form a relationship with Helena if she'll take me. Then that's a little bit more interesting, I think, than he only wants to be with her because of this drug that lasts forever, which I think is a bit bleak. Anyway, this sort of, I don't know whether this is of interest, but anyone ask any questions if you want, or it's just more a discussion with myself as I sit here. So I'm going to sort of go on to, if I propose this notion that the drugs are the flower is a drug, then where do these drugs come from? They come from the fairies. So who are the fairies? Now, as I've sort of talked about, like there's this sense that we go into this magical world and it's all very light and lovely, and there's fairies and that kind of slightly Victorian idea of all of the fairies wearing sequins and being like all delicious and delightful. I think is a bit outdated, and I think we've got an opportunity, and I think a lot of people do anyway when they approach this play, sort of go, right, okay, so who are the fairies? Now, if the fairies are administering these very powerful drugs to various people, and it's not magic, let's say they're people, then who are they? I like this notion that they might be sort of separated from society. They're like a little group of for want of a better word, hippies that like live in the forest and are maybe quite they live in the forest. They're dependent on the forest, and that's their society. But it also it does make it slightly dark, this idea that they're giving these very powerful herbs and flowers and what have you to these people, and what effect that has. But then, and this is another thing in the play, as I said at the beginning about how Athens is very much a patriarchal society, the balance of power between Oberon and Titania is quite intriguing in that regard, because Oberon and Titania, King and Queen of the Fairies, are dueling over the ownership of this changeling boy, this Indian prince. But Titania says very early on when we introduce these characters, she says, what's the quote? Somewhere in here. She essentially refers to the imbalance of nature. Oh yeah. With thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. And she goes on to describe how like the fog has come off the sea, and how nature has been disturbed because of the jealousy of Oberon, and because there's a discord between the power that these two people hold, or fairies, so to say. Now, there's something very paganistic about that, which actually ties into this notion that these are people dependent on the forest and live in the forest and live away from society. And I quite like this idea of it being a very pagan kind of cult. And it actually made me think about, and I don't know if anyone's seen, there was a horror film that came out, I'm going to go with last year, but I don't know, maybe it was earlier this year. Time is weird in the pandemic. It was called Midsummer, and it got quite a few good reviews, and it was essentially set in like I think it's like a Nordic, sort of either Sweden or Finland, and it was like a cut-off kind of cult that were very paganistic, and it was all a bit weird, and people started being killed, and if anyone's seen Midsummer, that film, I guess what I'm going at with everything that I've discussed is that what the fairies are? If we don't think about the fairies as being fairies, and we think about them as being people, then what do they represent, and what's their deal? What are they trying to achieve? And like, what is the status of like the swing, the patriarchal swing within that society? Because if all of nature is disturbed because of this imbalance, then I think that's quite nice. And you can extract from that what you want. Like if you want to sort of explore nature and the idea that nature is disturbed, and climate change, and etc., through that relationship, and apply that lens to the text, then I think that would be quite an interesting thing to do. One of the critics of the Joe Hill Gibbons production at the Young Vic, which I just mentioned about the mud, was that it looked a little bit like Glastonbury, like the pyramid stage, where you've got thousands of people churning up the ground in front of the stage, and it's sort of dirty and messy and all sorts. And I kind of like that. I like the idea that, and maybe that's what he was going for, but I like the idea that these lovers escaping Athens go into this mad kind of hippie, music-filled, drug-fueled sort of like existence and come out the other side, and it is a dream. It is, but it's not happy and fun. It's disturbing and dark and quite strange. Now, this leads me on to my final point, and I'm at 25 past it. This will probably tie things up together quite nicely, but the production at the Bridge Theatre, Nick Heitner, the major shift, and I said I'd mention this, was that he changed the lines between Titania and Oberon. Now, in the play that was written by William Shakespeare, Oberon, being really angry with Titania over this feud over the ownership of this Indian prince, he instructs Puck, his little minion, to put this drug, this flower, in Titania's eye, so that when she wakes up, she'll fall in love with the first thing, be it a bear or whatever. And she just so happens to wake up, and she falls in love with Nick Bottom, who has an ass's head on him, and she loves him, and yeah. Now, there's something slightly problematic, and I think and you can slightly understand why Nick might have gone down, has made that change, is that there's something slightly problematic with a male character saying, this woman's not doing what I want, so I'm going to drug her and punish her and make her sleep with something that she doesn't want to sleep with, be it a bear or what have you. And actually, the switch was not only really was not only like it brought up so much like brilliant stuff. The Oberon then falling in love with Nick Bottom, and this idea that the power balance between the male and female character was like tipped on its head a little bit. And Titania, actually, I think, even if you read the play in its original format, Titania is the stronger the character, has more status in my opinion anyway. But yeah, that switch was really good, and it also changed how the end of the play sort of happened. Because now, forgive me if I'm going into even too much detail, but so as I mentioned, Theseus and Hippolyta, now they're the king and queen essentially of Athens, are going to get married in 4 days. That's how the play sort of begins. Now the actors, the way that it's written, the actors who play Theseus and Hippolyta tend to also play Oberon and Titania. And there's this loose sort of sense that what happens in the forest between the fairies has like some sort of effect on Theseus and Hippolyta, or are those two pairings of characters slightly interlinked? And like Oberon does talk about, Oberon talks about how Titania has guided Theseus away before. But what was achieved by swapping over Oberon and Titania's lines was that there was a softening to Theseus, and he was slightly nervous about being around Hippolyta at the end of the play, having been very sort of severe with her at the beginning. And yeah, I think that just it adds another question about power dynamics, patriarchal, matriarchal societies, and sort of like, how does the dream state in the forest resolve or affect the end of the play? I guess that's one of my final thoughts. That has taken me. That is my half hour. A Midsummer Night's Dream. You could discuss and argue about it forever, and I hate to. I would hate to sort of have tainted anyone's sort of idea of the play by talking about its sort of darker qualities for the last half an hour. But I think it's really interesting, and I think actually it's a good thing to recognise that if you do root the play more in reality, then there's some big questions that it has to answer for. Anyway, that's your half hour. That's your book club. I will pause for a little bit in case any questions do come through, or any thoughts and feelings, ladies and gentlemen. But I will sort of wrap it all up just there. So I hope everyone's lockdown is going okay. I'm in my bedroom. Instagram, anything from you? Someone's just joined, which is unfortunate because I'm about to leave. Facebook, anything from you? Is a wave at least, so that's nice. Thank you, Lydia. Alrighty, I'm going to go, but thank you very much. I hope that made some sense, and I hope your lockdowns are going well. Stay connected to the King's Head. It's a fantastic theatre, and they're trying to stay connected and help you out. Okay, guys, all the best, and until next time. Bye-bye, Instagram. Lovely to see you. And now, and Facebook, ta-ra, if I know how to do it.